Hey, welcome back to the videos. We're still looking at theory for the banjo and using some application ideas. And specifically for the last few weeks we've been looking at modes. And we're looking at the key of G, examining a simple chord progression like 1-4-5, which would be G, C, and D chords in a simple 3-chord song. And we're examining how we may use modes to actually solo over the chord changes in the key of G, G, C, and D. And we've already examined that some modes are major sounding, some modes are minor sounding, and some modes give you, or one mode in particular, gives you a diminished sound. And we're applying that logic over these 3 chord changes. So we've already looked at G major, C major, and now let's focus on the D major chord. So again, the same rules apply. We need to pick 3 major sounding modes that we can play over the D chord for soloing ideas. Now we know obviously Ionian is the easiest one to play, so D Ionian is our normal D natural major scale, if you want to call it a natural scale, but it's the one everybody knows is the beloved D scale. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D, and then you can keep going and you'll have a 2-octave scale. But now that's the obvious choice. Again, for the other 2 chord changes, we also found that Lydian, I don't particularly like. The 4th mode of a scale gives us a slightly altered major sound. So we need to find a scale that has D as its 4th note, which would be an A scale. A, B, C sharp, D. So when we say that we're playing D Lydian, for instance, what we're saying is that we're using the 4th mode of an A major scale as our new scale to solo with. And again, it's tonally centered on a D note because it starts and ends with a D note, this D Lydian scale. But it's actually a different arrangement of A scale notes. Now, what's the difference between an A scale and just a normal D scale, D Ionian? Well, a D scale has 2 sharp notes. It has an F sharp and it has a C sharp. An A scale has the F sharp, a G sharp, and a C sharp. So there's 1 extra sharp note that we have to deal with. So to play a D Lydian scale, which we already know sounds a little bit foreign in regards to the normal major scale because of that 1 added note, or altered note I should say, not added. So let's compare again. Here's the D scale, Ionian. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. Now if we want to play D Lydian, we take that new arrangement of A scale notes that are centered on a D, and that gives us now a G sharp note that we have to play. D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, and D. Now immediately when you hear that G sharp note, you're thinking that sounds a little out of the box. It sounds like it's not quite with a regular D major chord. And you would be right in terms of just how that sounds against a chord. But we've already found out from our study of the Lydian scales from G and C that a Lydian scale sometimes functions better over a jazzy major 7 chord, or it could function over other jazz chords like D9, for instance. So it can relate to something that sounds outside the bounds of like normal traditional bluegrass or old time, for instance. But if you experiment with just the scale notes themselves and don't think, well, this scale has to be played over a D major 7 because it's a jazzy sounding a mode, that's not, you wouldn't really be using the mode to its full potential. You'd really be putting the mode in a little box. Like this mode can only be played over a jazz chord, which is not true at all. I mean, jazz players would use that mode to play over a major 7. But don't think you're limited to just playing it over a jazzy sounding chord. Those notes from the Lydian mode can also give you some pretty cool sounds over a D. You just have to keep an open mind about how you're going to use the notes. So they're just soloing tools, so don't think that you're locked into one particular chord sound. This mode can function over D major 7 or D major 9, yes, but it can also function over a D if you keep an open mind about it. So again, here's the, watching our time, D Ionian, which is our normal D scale. Here's the Lydian sound, D Lydian, which comes from the A scale. By having that G sharp note, it, kind of pulls you in a different direction. But experiment with that mode and see what happens. And see if you like those tones and have fun with it and see what you can do. Now, that was the D Lydian. The D Mixolydian is the other mode that's going to give us a major sounding mode, but again, it's going to be slightly altered in sound because of a different note placement. We know that Mixolydian, I don't particularly like my. Mixolydian represents the fifth note of a scale as far as modes go. So we need to find a major scale, or it could be a minor scale, but in this case a major scale, that has that D note as its fifth note. G, A, B, C, D. So a G major scale actually is where our D Mixolydian would come from. Now what does that mean in terms of how it would sound over a D chord? Well, if you think about a G scale only has one sharp note, F sharp. But a D scale, like our D Ionian, had a C sharp and an F sharp. So you have one less sharp note to worry about. So if I wanted to play D Mixolydian, I'd have D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D. If I play a normal D scale, I have D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. So I have one extra sharp. Now, again, when you play a Mixolydian mode over a chord like D, D Mixolydian gives you a bluesy or a dominant sound because of that note choice. So now we have D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D. No C sharp this time. And again, when you play traditional music, old-time bluegrass, and like blues, Mixolydian mode immediately gives you sounds that you can recognize. You can say, oh, that sounds like a particular lick or phrase I've heard. Oh, that sounds like a basis of a melody I've heard, because a lot of our melodies, licks, and phrases are based on Mixolydian sounds. So if you wanted to kind of blues up, and this is not really functioning as a full-blown blues scale, but you can inflect a blues note because of that Mixolydian mode. So by having a C note in place of a C sharp, you kind of change the feel, the mood, the tonal center shifts around slightly. It's still based on a D note, but having that C note as opposed to a C sharp kind of gives it a dominance. So most of the really famous melodic licks that function that way, that have that particular sound, are actually coming from a Mixolydian mode. So we have D Ionian, which is our normal D scale, and we have, our time's about running out, we have the D Lydian, which gives us that slightly altered sound that could function over a major chord, major 7, and a major 9 chord, but it also can function over, a normal major chord if you keep an open mind about it. And then we have the D Mixolydian mode for D, which gives us that dominant and slightly bluesy sound. So try these three modes over D and see what you like about them, and experiment with the patterns, and we'll see you next video where we try to use some of these ideas to maybe build some cool sounding licks and soloing ideas. See you next time. Thanks.